Yesterday we began discussing the verse in Mishlei where Shlomo Melech tells us in Proverbs, Ki ner mitzvah v'Torah or, and says, Derech Musar tochochas Chaim, v'derech Chaim tochochas Musar. Ki ner mitzvah Torah or, v'derech Chaim, and the path of life is tochochas Musar. It's being informed of information which allows a person to restrain and suppress his inclinations. That's derech Chaim. So the Maral had explained that a ner, which means a candle, is a receptacle. It's the oil, it's the wick, and then you ignite the wick. That's the mitzvah. Any mitzvah we do is directly connected to our bodies, to our physicality. You put on tefillin, you put on tzitzis, you eat matzah, you sit in the sukkah. It's our physicality is involved. The moment the soul leaves the body, there's no mitzvah any longer. Everything ceases to function. The moment the fuel is expended, the wick turns into carbon, there's no light any longer. So the light only illuminates as long as there's the physicality of the receptacle and the fuel. Torah is something which is unrelated to the physicality of the person. Torah is directly abstract, intangible, it's conceptual, and it has directly rooted in our soul. The soul functions independent of the body. The body does not function independent of the soul. Therefore, the mitzvah, the Talmud tells us that when one does a mitzvah, even with a proper intent, it only protects you as long as you're doing the mitzvah. You merit divine protection. The moment you cease doing the mitzvah, one does not have the divine protection any longer. But when you study Torah, the Torah itself that you had studied previously protects you even after you cease studying it. So he explains why. Just as the body itself, the physicality of the world, functions within the context of time, and it's finite, anything which is related to time, it's at the moment. Therefore, since the mitzvah is determined through the action of the person, and the person is physical, and the human being lives within time, therefore, the outgrowth of that takes on that characteristics of limitation. Therefore, it only protects you only when you're engaging in itself. You cease engaging in the mitzvah, you no longer have the divine protection. But the study of Torah, which is not connected to the physicality of the person, it transcends it. It's outside of physicality. It's not time-bound. And because it's not time-bound, as a result of that, it surpasses the moment. And therefore, even after you cease studying, you merit the divine protection of that study of Torah. This is the Maral of Prague, as I'm explaining it. Therefore, it's Torah or. The Torah is the illuminator. It illuminates even beyond the moment you study, it keeps illuminating. Its effect continues. The mitzvah, as I said, it is only divine as you're doing it. Of course, it sanctifies, you receive unlimited reward for it. But in terms of the innateness of it, to be able to bring it about, it's only due to the person's participation through the physical. Now, he explains, he says something interesting. The Gemara tells us in one location that if you want to be a chassid, you want to be scrupulously pious, devoutly pious, there's a question, what should you study? One opinion is you should study Mili de Avos. You should study Tractate Avos, Pirkei Avos. If you want to be devoutly pious, scrupulously pious. The other one says you should study the laws of torts, damages, nizikin. And the other one says if you want to be devoutly pious, you study the laws of blessings. So the Maharal of Prague explains they're all in agreement. Each one's just addressing another aspect of what has to do to be able to achieve that level of spirituality that you classified as a devoutly, scrupulously pious person. So he says something interesting. A human being is comprised of three things. You're comprised of a life source, a spirit, and a soul. All three. This spirit or the life source, that's our physicality, our movement, our involvement. If a person who's naturally a damager, he's not concerned for other people's possessions, so he damages them. What we speak of damage, there's no benefit of damage. So if a person is a damager, what does that say about his being? There's something very negative about that being. Person goes and indulges in something which is desire. There's a benefit, the desire, he's satisfying desire. But if a person goes and he damages and destroys, there's no benefit. That emanates from a maliciousness or a lack of consideration for somebody else. So that's a defect in the life source of the person. So if you want to perfect that life source of your own, you have to study the laws of damages. To what degree you have to be careful and have a level of foresight that you should never do anything, that there should be any, even indirect cause to cause somebody else a loss. And if a person has that level of sensitivity, then his life source is really on a special level because he's continuously honing it and perfecting it and sensitizing it by learning the laws of torts and damages to understand what is and what's not. So if you want to be the chosid and perfect that aspect of your being, which is the life source, you should study the laws of torts. If you want to be the special person, another opinion says you should study Pirkei Avos, the laws of ethics, how to behave, what is considered quality behavior, what is considered not quality behavior. That's within the person himself. That's the essence of the person. That is the spirit. And then we speak about the laws of brachos, blessings. What is a blessing? A blessing is an acknowledgement. Firstly, acknowledging that things don't happen by themselves. Everything in life is an endowment. But God wills that there should be various amenities available to us, that mankind should be able to benefit from those amenities which God created, whether it's the fruit of the tree, the fruit of the ground, or all came about through his word. That has to do with the soul. You're perfecting the soul, because that's your relation with God. So if a person goes and addresses the laws of blessings, the laws of torts, you study those laws, and Pirkei Avos, the laws of ethics, how we have to behave to be a quality person, we address every aspect of our being. The Talmud tells us in one location, there were three gifts given to the Jewish people. What are the three gifts? The Torah was given to us. The land of Israel was given to us as a gift. And Olam Haba, and the world to come, was given to us. Three gifts. However, these three gifts don't come about easily. To be able to be qualified to receive these gifts, they come about through Yisurim. There's a degree of suffering. You have to really pay the price to be qualified to receive that gift. And he goes to explain that what is the concept of Yisurim? Yisurim is always suffering. It's payment. Whenever we suffer, it minimizes and it compromises our physicality. That's what it is. Anything that has to do with Kedusha, with sanctity, which is godliness, physicality is the farthest thing from godliness. When a person goes and he toils to study Torah, what does that mean? He's compromising his physicality. He's willing to minimize his physicality for the sake of that holiness. So by minimizing the physicality, you become less physical, less earthy. By becoming less earthy, you become worthy of that gift, which is the relationship with God, which is the Torah itself. We find the Torah tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he went to receive the Torah on behalf of the Jewish people, he spent 40 days and 40 nights in heaven. And he shares with the Jewish people, when he was in heaven, he says, Lechem lo achalti, mayim lo shasisi. When I was in heaven, I did not eat bread and I did not drink water. Me miraculously lived there without any physical sustenance. So the Midrash asks, and if he would have eaten bread and drunk water, why is this information pertinent and crucial for us to know? That when he received the Torah for those 40 days, he did not have any physical nourishment, not bread, not water. So the Midrash tells us, what Moshe Rabbeinu is telling the Jewish people, that just as I, during that 40-day period, Mosarti domi v'chel b'yoleo, I gave my blood and my fat for the sake of Torah. Factually speaking, Moshe Rabbeinu was physically minimized during those 40 days and 40 nights. That he lived was a miracle, without sustenance. But factually, it had an effect. It had a physical consequence on his body. So meaning, the only way he was qualified to have the capacity to be the repository of Torah was only by minimizing his physicality. Because the Torah is the ultimate in spirituality and allows us to have a relationship with God. Therefore, what qualifies us, I think there's a greater qualification to be the repository of Torah and merit the divine assistance to process it. It's a minimization of our physicality. That's why you acquire it through Yisurim, through a degree of suffering. As we say in life, there are no free rides in life. Everything has a cost factor, even though it may be a material cost. But here, and what's the return? It's an exchange, physical for physical. When it comes to Torah, the exchange is the ultimate exchange. By compromising your physical, because you only are more qualified to enter the spiritual realm if you're less physical. So you have to assume a persona of less physical to have greater relevance to the spiritual. And then we're worthy of a gift. A gift is always from the benefactor. The beneficiary is the receiver of the gift, but it's a one-sided affair. The benefactor is giving the gift. Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, is referred to as the Holy Land. It's God's location. As we mentioned, every location in the world has an archangel overseeing that location. The world was divided among the 70 root nations of the world, 70 nations. Each root nation has an archangel. So that location which that root nation identifies with has an archangel overseeing that location. Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, has no archangel. That land, that location was given to the Jewish people. We have a direct connection to God. God oversees that location. And because God has that direct connection with the location, that's why the land itself is called the Holy Land. Because anything which is associated with God assumes a holy status. So to have relevance to that, what do we have to do to be worthy, to be qualified to acquire that and to have that? You have to compromise your physicality. Therefore, it's niknas al yidei surim. It's only acquired through compromising our physicality. There's a suffering involved. You're willing to sacrifice, to compromise yourself for the sake of that. Olam haba, the world to come. What's the world to come? It's a relation with God. It's a total, but the most spiritual reality in existence. That's the world to come. How does one acquire and merit or share in the world to come? That means when you're confronted with a challenge and you resist the challenge and you suppress the desire not to go against the will of God. What's suppression of desire? Reining in on inclination. There's a pain factor. There's a compromise on yourself. What about if you have to motivate yourself? A person has a natural inertia not to do something, and you have an obligation to perform a positive commandment. What does that mean? That means you have to go forward. You have to be proactive. But you prefer to be laid back, to procrastinate, put it off. But yet we have a principle. When a mitzvah presents itself, you should not allow it to become leavened. You're not permitted to delay it. Immediate. That immediacy, attending to it, that's going against the grain. Whenever you go against the grain at any level, there's a compromise on one's essence, on one's being, on one's physicality. That's the world to come. The way you acquire a share in the world to come, as somebody once said, what does God want from us? Not to do what we want to do, but to do what we don't want to do. What we want to do is what we're inclined to do. The challenge of life is not to do what you want to do, but to do what God wants you to do, which is going against the grain, suppressing all the inclinations, all the desires, and going against the inertia of a human being to be motivated to do at a moment where you're not in a position or an interest to be motivated. You overcome that. That's spirituality. To have relevance to holiness, which is the world to come, to the land of Israel, which is relation with God, or Torah, which is the ultimate entity of holiness, it's only you acquire it with Yisurim. You have to compromise your physicality. King Solomon tells us in Proverbs, Tzaddik ochel l'sov nafsho. When a tzaddik eats, it's only to save his soul, nothing more than that. Now, we enjoy eating, and if I take another portion, another morsel, is it so terrible? You're not in violation of anything. We're not saying you're in violation. But if you want to make the grade, you have to understand who you have to be. The tzaddik only eats to save his soul. Because anything other than saving your soul automatically is a compromise on your spiritual capacity. So you want to maximize to have the greatest degree of spiritual capacity. So by minimizing your physicality, it makes you more qualified to be the domicile for holiness. Because you're less physical. That's the concept. If you want to be a chassid, devoutly, scrupulously pious, you study Pirkei Avos. What is a quality person? Is the person who wears the Meritorious suit and the Hermes silk scarf, and he wears that diamond pinky ring, and all this, whatever it is in the material, that's not the quality person. Quality person is the essence of the person. What's quality? Person who's, when you see him, you say he's a prince. And we're talking about a person who knows what a prince is. Princely behavior, princely character, sterling character. If you want to have that sterling, princely persona, you have to study the laws of ethics of our fathers. This was given at Sinai. As I once said, the introduction to Pirkei Avos is the order of transmission from Sinai. Because you would think our great rabbis, they were sociologists, psychologists, they understood what a person should be, has nothing to do with them. These behavior patterns or these sensitivities or considerations, this was ordained at Sinai, as you must wear tefillin at Sinai. That's when it was ordained, how a Jew has to behave in every aspect of his interaction, man and his fellow. This was ordained at Sinai. How we have to treat the poor, how our homes have to be open to the poor, how we have to desire the study of Torah, how we have to see ourselves in terms of humility. How does one achieve humility? How does one fend off all kinds of negative influences? All this is contained here. So how do you become that quality, elite person? Elite in the true sense of elite, not elitist, to be elite. You have to study this. So if you want to be the chassid, you want to be the devout person, scrupulously pious, where God sees you as that special person, that's what you have to study. I once told a story, Moshe Feinstein, as I said, even a person who's exemplary in between man and his fellow, as exemplary is, he can't hold up a candle to where Moshe Feinstein was, who was the leading Torah sage of his generation when he lived. He passed away at the age of 95, 35 years ago. I mentioned the story in terms of his sensitivity to a fellow human being. When he was older, and he had a driver who would drive him and take him wherever he wanted to go. And his driver was a person who was an older person, not an old person. He was already in his 50s. He wasn't the person who was fully functional, wasn't married. And this person's whole pride and joy, his value in life, and his whole self-esteem was that he was Rabbi Feinstein's personal driver. That was his glory. And he was known, he is Rabbi Feinstein's driver, personal driver. And he's always at his beck and call. And he felt privileged to be at Rabbi Feinstein's beck and call. And one day, Rabbi Feinstein, an older person, when he gets into a car, he just can't just slip into the seat. He has to hold on to the frame of the car to allow him to lower himself onto the seat. And this person didn't realize it. And as Ramosh is still holding to the frame of the car, he slams the door on his fingers. You could imagine how excruciating that pain was. Ramosha Feinstein did not utter a sound, not a sound. Why? Because he knew if he'd utter that sound, he would destroy this person. This person, his life would be destroyed because he would feel he failed as a human being, as who he's supposed to be. How could he bring injury and pain upon this holy rabbi? So he failed as who he's supposed to be. If a person, God forbid, gets his hand slammed in a door, do you know what kind of level of, that means every moment of Ramosha's conscious, awake moment, he was cognizant of every moment. Otherwise, it's impossible to restrain the sound of pain because it's something which is instantaneous. You respond immediately, but he was able to suppress it. That's the level of control he had. So as a person whose quality, who's exemplary between man and his fellow, not to hurt a person as much as an iota, not to take everything into consideration. At what level do you have to be? We're told this person's a saint. His behavior is saintly behavior. It's not ordinary. Where I told a story Somebody had called Rabbi Feinstein from Israel 3:00 in the morning to ask a halachic question. And the person didn't realize the time difference. And he called whatever time, it was like 10 o'clock in the morning, it was 3 in the morning. And Rabbi Feinstein immediately answers the phone. And the person says he wants to ask the great rabbi a halachic question. So he says to him, could you just wait, please wait just a few moments. And it took about 3 minutes to get back onto the phone. Why did it take him 3 minutes? Because when he woke up, he had to wash his hands. He had to say the blessings before he engages in Torah study, because he has to respond. And he answers and he responds to the person's question. And then before he hangs up the phone on the person, he says to her, could you please give me your address? We live in Israel. And he figured he didn't understand why. Maybe he wanted to send him the copy of the ruling that he'd given him. What do you think he wanted his address for? That because he kept him waiting on the phone for 3 minutes, the cost of the phone call, because of Rabbi Feinstein, was a few dollars. He mailed him a check because he was the cause that it cost him an extra few dollars because he had to wait for Rabbi Feinstein to get back on the phone. You understand what this is? He wakes him up 3 in the morning due to not thinking that there's a time difference. And he wants Rabbi Feinstein to accommodate him to respond to him. And because Rabbi Feinstein had to wait and delay to get on the phone, to be in a proper moment to be able to respond, Rabbi Feinstein felt he has to compensate and reimburse this person for holding him on the phone. You tell me what this is. This is not saintly behavior. It's unheard of. But do you think this comes out of a vacuum? If you study the laws of ethics of our fathers, you study the laws of blessings, you study laws of torts, you're sensitive to everything. There's no area in your life of your development that there's no sensitivity. And due to this exceptional, sensitive senses regarding another human being, for you, it's natural. It's understand that's what you're supposed to do. You don't even see it as saintly behavior. It's the appropriate, the right thing to do. And that's who he was. We're holding now the closing part of the Shmon Esrei of the Amidah. It's Modim. Modim Anachloch. We give thanks to you. I mentioned that one of the offerings that was brought in the Mishkan, in the Beis Hamikdash, in the temple, was a thanks offering. When does one bring a thanks offering? So the Talmud tells us if one experiences one of 4 things. If one recovers from a serious illness, one must bring a thanks offering. A thanks offering is comprised of an animal, which the person himself, although he's not a Kohen, is permitted to eat. And it's eaten in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, and the 40 loaves of bread, which accompany the thanks offering. 30 of the 40 loaves are matzah, not leavened. 10 are leavened, what we call chametz. And when you recover from that serious illness, you bring the thanks offering to offer thanks to God that you recovered. A person was incarcerated in prison and he was released from prison. That he was released and he came out of that alive or not compromised physically, mentally, emotionally, you give thanks to God, you bring a thanks offering. If one travels the high seas where you're in a state of danger and you return in safety, you bring a thanks offering to God to thank him that you're alive. The 4th situation where you bring a thanks offering is if a person travels, takes a trek through a desert, we're exposed to unlimited amounts of danger, and you come out alive, you bring a thanks offering. These are the 4 instances you bring a thanks offering. And there are others, a person, God forbid, is in an accident and comes out alive, you bring a thanks offering, something similar to this. But this is the format of the situation where you bring a thanks offering. Means something out of the ordinary happens that naturally you shouldn't have survived, and it's semi-miraculous you did survive. You acknowledge God by saying thank you. And it's brought through, the acknowledgement comes through the thanks offering. So there's a question which is asked by the commentators. Normally, all meal offerings are matzah, not leavened. They're not chometz. Why are 10 of the 40 loaves, why are they chometz? Why are they chometz? Chometz always represents, as we discussed it on Pesach, something that's leavened rises. It represents something negative. Pompousness, haughtiness, self-centeredness. That's something that's leavened is tastier. Of course, there's the fermentation process causes it to be tasted. It represents desire. So Pesach, we eat matzah. God says, I want you to wean yourself and separate yourself from arrogance and desire for 7 days. And that will be beneficial to your spirituality, to put you on an even keel for the whole year. The evil inclination, who's the one who tempts us and challenges in all aspects of our lives, is compared to the yeast in the dough, because that activates all these various things within us to cause us, to challenge us, and even to fail. So the question is, so if the thanks offering is a meal offering, and as the 30 loaves are matzah, why do we have 10 loaves which are chometz? That's the question which is asked by the commentators. So one of the commentators explains, the Sefarno, that if a person is in the position of danger, if he's sin-free, he's sinless, and he has no claim against him, spiritually speaking, why should he die? There's no reason for him to die. He has a clean record. The only reason why it's considered a miracle that you didn't die and you weren't subject to the environment, whether it's the ocean or it's the desert, is because there is a claim and you deserve to be punished, but God is willing to protect you despite your shortcomings. Spiritually speaking, he protects you. That's why you say thank you. A person has unlimited amount of debt, and the creditor says, you know something, I'm going to give you a 4-year grace period before you pay. Here the person believed that the mountain was coming to crush him, and he says, 4-year grace period. The person has a sigh of relief. He says, thank you. And he'll sing the man's praises for the next 4 years till he comes knock on his door again. You're relieved. So since nobody has a perfect record, as King Solomon says in Koheles, even the greatest tzaddik doesn't have a perfect record. So there is a basis for prosecution, and you should have been compromised. So despite that you should have and you weren't, that's why we bring the thanks offering. That's the representation of chometz, that even though there is chometz here, it's not a perfect situation. You're lacking in purity. Despite that, God performed the miracle and you recovered. You came out of prison whole. You survived the ocean, the sea voyage, you survived the desert. That's how the Sefarno explains it, which is very understandable. I explained it a little differently. Now, I always say, rule of thumb, a person who's appreciative and he feels beholding to somebody who did something on his behalf, does that normally indicate? That's usually a quality person. That's an indication of quality. But there are very few people, or the vast majority of people, do they fully reciprocate to the degree that they were accommodated. They don't. They minimize the degree that they were beneficiaries. The question is why? If actually you're a beneficiary to that degree, acknowledge it. But somehow, as we say in the vernacular, everybody has a spin on it. I'll give you an example. Person works for a company and they give him a bonus. Gets a sizable bonus. You have two types of people. One person says, you can't imagine that I feel privileged working for this company. They treat their employees exceptionally well. Not only did they pay my salary, they gave me a handsome bonus. It makes a difference in my life. Therefore, I'm beholden, I'm even more dedicated to the company. Another person says, what do you think they gave me a bonus? If I wouldn't provide profits for them and I wouldn't be their rainmaker, would they give me a bonus? I feel they should even give me more. Rather than being beholden and being thankful and appreciative, the man says, I owe them nothing. It's a debt they paid me. But qualitatively, what's the difference between these two people? The one who sees it, even though it's true, you only give a bonus to a person who actually has added value, but factually, you are a beneficiary because they're not forced to give you the bonus. They could give you a lesser bonus. So to be appreciative, that speaks volumes of the quality of that person. The other person who has his spin on it, who sees it, puts it in his own context, he doesn't want to recognize that he is a beneficiary. So therefore, he interprets it and processes it that he has no debt of gratitude to the person who provided that for him. But why? But if factually speaking, you are a recipient and a beneficiary of somebody else's good value, why not? So King Solomon in Mishlei in Proverbs tells us, Eved lo v'lish malveh. When you borrow money, you're a slave to your creditor. The debtor has a slave responsibility. You have to pay that debt no matter what. If the man was nice enough to lend you money, you're at his beck and call. Not that you have to say thank you, but if there's a question, you owe the money, you say to the creditor, you come pick up your own money. You want the money, come pick it up yourself. I'm too busy now. No. You as a borrower have an obligation to repay the person, to go to the lender, because that's part of you're indebted. There's an indebtedness between the debtor and the creditor. You understand? When you assume debt, you're shackled, you're bound, you're burdened. Which human being wants to be burdened? Adam, he's given one mitzvah. Don't eat of the tree of knowledge. And nobody could have understood it better than Adam. He's the God of Eden. And what does he do? He eats of the tree of knowledge, which God said, not in the day you will eat, you will die. You become subject to death. Of course, he had to somehow justify it. How did he justify eating? God says, no, how did he justify it? So I always say over the name of the Arizal that we read in Pirkei Avos, Lefum Tzara Agra, that the greater the challenge, the greater is the value of the accomplishment. Before eating the tree of knowledge, to do the right thing was what we call a shoo-in. The clarity he had was so simple, it didn't take that much effort to do the right thing. He wanted to be the hero. I will eat of the tree of knowledge, become convoluted. I will no longer have that clarity, and despite the lack of clarity, I will still do the right thing. But why? You know why? Because I want to have my input. I don't want to live my life based on what you tell me. I want to have my own creativity to develop my own approach. You understand? I don't want to be bound by your dictate. I want to have some ingenuity, creativity in the way I live my life, even as a servant of God. So God comes to Adam and says, what happened? He says, well, I want to be a hero. God says, I'm not looking for heroes. I'm looking for a person who does exactly what I told you to do. That's the servant of God. That's what I want. A human being naturally, we find that when Adam comes to, God comes to Adam and says, why did you achieve knowledge? What did he say? He said, it's the woman you gave me. Hear this? The woman you gave me. Why did God create a wife, Adam? To be his helpmate, to assist him in his objective. So God says, here I give you a woman who has invaluable value to assist you to succeed. And then you point the accusing finger at me that I'm the cause of your failing. You're an ingrate. You're an ingrate, because if you'd appreciate what it was, you couldn't speak this way. Could you imagine? Not only did Adam wasn't he feel indebted to God for giving him the wife, he accuses God of he's the cause of his failing. Could you imagine? To that degree, that's what a human being is. He runs to such a degree and denies that he's a beneficiary that not only does he acknowledge the creditor or the benefactor for the good, the problem which comes about, he blames it for the problem. You're the cause of the problem. When we were in the desert in the 40th year, and the generation of desert passed on, during that 40-year period, the 40th year, we're about to go into the promised land, the Jews start complaining. We've been eating this wafer food long enough, 40 years. You know something? We haven't done our bodily functions in 40 years because it was miracle food. It was absorbed in the inner organs. You know something? We never thought about it. Maybe eventually, you know what's going to happen? All this that we ingested over this 40-year period will expand in our intestines, and our intestines will burst and we're going to die. You hear this newfangled bug that got into their heads. God immediately sends vipers, and they start biting the Jews and they start dying. God says, Kri Tova b'nei Kri Tova. You're ingrates who descend from an ingrate. Your forefather Adam is an ingrate. This is a continuation of that same being an ingrate. How do you see something so backward? How do you see something so wrong? You know what this is? Not only are you not appreciative and feel indebted for the miracle that I do for you, but you have a claim against me. You're coming up with newfangled understandings that this is all a ploy to destroy us. You understand what this is? Because nobody wants to be a debtor. So now let's talk about the thanks offering. A person recovers from an illness. He had the best medical care, best doctors. And he recovers. He has to bring a thanks offering. Now he has a choice of how to really see this, what happened. Does he attribute it to the medical field, to the miracle drug and the doctor, or does he attribute it to God? Because, you know, not everybody lives with the doctor, with the medicine, with the modern medicine. Do you attribute it to the doctor and to your insurance that you were able to afford to pay that for that kind of medical care? Or do you attribute it to God? Because you didn't have to live. Now, if you attribute it to the doctor and not to God, you're not indebted to God. You're not a debtor. So there's a struggle. Naturally, human being doesn't want to be a debtor. Acknowledging that I have a benefactor, I'm a debtor. That means I'm beholden to God. So it's a struggle. There's a statistic, people recover. But not everybody recovers. Well, based on the statistic, I should have recovered. You still have to bring that thanks offering. Because despite the fact is that you could have attributed the statistic and say it has nothing to do with God, yet you saw it correctly, and you're saying, thank you, I'm acknowledging I'm alive because God wanted me to be alive. So what is thank you? Thank you is an acknowledgement that you are my benefactor. That's what he's saying, thank you. That means despite the challenge, which is a difficult challenge, that to assume a debt of responsibility to your benefactor, I'm happy to assume that debt of responsibility. I am a debtor to God. Therefore, what is that? That's chametz. I had a struggle. The chametz, the evil inclination, me said, turn your back on God and attribute to statistic. Despite that I have an evil inclination, I saw it right. That's the thanks offering. Even though a human being part and parcel of his makeup, his evil inclination, despite that, he overcame that challenge and he saw it correctly, despite the chametz, despite the evil inclination. Therefore, as a result of that, 10 of the 40 loaves are leavened to indicate that despite that, nevertheless, he sees it correctly. That's the modim. That's the thanks offering. And every one of these instances, whether it's leaving prison intact, well, there are people who do leave intact. People do this. People recover. People travel the high seas and come back alive. They take the trek through the desert, they come back alive. You could say it's a statistic, or no, God wants you to be alive. I acknowledge God wants me to be alive. That's the accomplishment. That's the success. That's the success story. That's what it's about. We're healthy. We succeed. We have blessing. We're intelligent. We're able to process things. We're endowed with a degree of insight and wisdom. Well, you say, I'm no different than the guy down the block. Some are smarter, some are less smart, some are more successful, less successful. That's the reality of the world. No. I give thanks to you. So what is saying thank you? Thank you is an acknowledgement. This is not something which is random. It's not a random occurrence. But rather, the reason why I am a beneficiary of what it may be is because God chose that I should be the beneficiary. Therefore, we say thank you. So the closing section of the Amidah is what? It's something very vital. Very often, I once told a story with my friend, the professed atheist. And I asked him, I said to him, if you'd be on the battlefield and there's a trench and you go into the trench and the mortar's falling, exploding, and you'd be in the trench and I'd offer you a book of Psalms. I said to him a book of Tehillim. You know what Tehillim was? Would you say the Tehillim? Because we say, there are no atheists in the foxhole. Would you say the Tehillim? He says, of course I'd say the Tehillim. I said, if you came out alive, unscathed, would you attribute that you survived because of the Tehillim? He says, no. So I said, so why did you say the Tehillim? He says, because what do I have to lose? That's it. That's what he said to me. You understand what this is? He cannot acknowledge. The man is so pompous, even though he's a giving person, but he gives the way he wants to give. Everything is his spin, his brand. It's his kindness. It's the way he structures it. It's according to what he wants. If you attribute your survival to God, you realize, Mr. Big Shot, it's not you. I could deflate you in 3 seconds. And you're not deflated because I didn't deflate you. Something that's too much for him to swallow. Although this guy, he could eat a triple portion of food and he could eat another triple after that. He has a great capacity, but he's swallowing what he wants to swallow. But to swallow what somebody else wants him to swallow, he's not swallowing that so quickly. That's part of his self-centeredness. It's the way I see it. So not to say thank you to God, not to acknowledge that this is God's doing, that's a denial. That's an arrogance. It's a lack of humility. Because if you are a debtor, so acknowledge you're a debtor. No, I'm a self-made man. I went through plenty in my life. And despite that, I came out on top. This person, he always uses a word. And I never heard the word until I met him. He needs empirical evidence. Unless he has empirical evidence, he doesn't accept it. So what happened was, I said to him, when there was the market crash in the 80s, and he lost in one day about $300 million, and you couldn't even get him on the phone. That's how he was in the doldrums. So I called him up. I said, I thought you buy and trade and sell. It's all based on empirical evidence. So what happened? It's all empirical evidence. He says, well, you realize the peaks and the valleys, This is one of the valleys. That's what he said to me. You know, you understand? Your head is, you're about to go under the quicksand. You're about 2 inches before it goes into your mouth. And you can't acknowledge it. And so, but you understand? God brings merit to the meritorious. So what happened? Everybody sold off what they had for nothing. And because he had more money than most, he picked up everything for nothing. So he came out more ahead because of the crash than prior to the crash. That proves I'm head honcho. I'm top of the hilt. I'm King Tut. You know, they'll display your remains in the Museum of Natural History and they'll send it around the world, King Tut. But no modim. I don't say thank you. I say only thank you for what I'm interested in. Otherwise, no thank you. I once took this person to Rabbi Pinto. And this person is no lightweight, physically speaking. So Rabbi Pinto said to him, you don't wear tefillin, do you? He says, no. But of course, he was given tefillin at his bar mitzvah. And he says, I promise you that if you wear tefillin, the story goes back about 20 years ago. I promise you, you will never experience a stroke in your life. And this person, based on his physical profile, he could be, God forbid, a candidate for a stroke. Overweight, doesn't eat healthy, doesn't exercise as you should, a candidate. I promise you, you wear tefillin, you will never have a stroke. You know what he said to Rabbi Pinto? No, thank you. I appreciate what you're saying. I will not put on tefillin. That was the story. Because it's his way, no other way. I always say thank you for what I'm interested in. Otherwise, it's no thank you. And that's what it's all about. Modim anachnu loch. We give thanks to you. Now, if you don't read a little bit further, most people don't even think about this. It doesn't resonate. What's the first and foremost we give thank you for? For what all our supplications? Now, what was the opening phrase, blessing of the Amidah? Elokeinu ve'elokei Avosenu. What is Elokeinu? When we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, what's Elokeinu? God Almighty. You know what Almighty means? That means all power is contained within him. That's Almighty. He created this universe. He's Elokeinu. Could you imagine? We, physical beings, fickle peons, nobodies. He took us to be his people. And there's a personalization. What is the value of that? You know what the value of that is? It's not to be understood, to be privileged. If you said thank you for the next 1,000 years, it's not enough. If you really appreciate and understand what that means. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu Elokei Avosenu. You're our Almighty and you're our forefathers Almighty. So what's first and foremost that we have to thank you for? Not that he puts food on our table. Not that he gives our health and our intelligence and our blessing. That you are our God. You being the Almighty, you took us as your people. There's a personalization between us and you. Literally those words. The same words we began the Amidah with. We identified who is God to us. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu ve'elokei Avosenu. Modim nachloch shatu Hashem Elokeinu ve'elokei Avosenu. The same words. And the God of our forefathers. But here we had something else. La'olam vo'ed. This relationship is forever. Never to be terminated. To that degree, God accepted us to be his people, to be our God Almighty, and to be concerned for us that there's this personalization between us and him. That's what we're giving thanks for. We're appreciating that. The nations of the world, when they were off the Torah Sinai, they said, no, thank you. We have other priorities. We're too busy right now. First and foremost, what do we give thank you for? Shatohu Hashem Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avoseinu. That's the first thing. L'olam v'ed, forever. So there's no escape clause here. Once we're in forever. And for that, we see the upside. There's nothing comparable to this. Even angels don't have that level of relationships. The greatest angels don't have that relationship with God. So by saying modim, we acknowledge that, we value that. We're indebted, we're beholding to you for that. That's the connotation of modim. Modim and achluch.